Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today and reflecting on this important topic of water scarcity. I'm from Uganda, and my talk is really on my reflections about my work as a journalist and as a campaigner in a country like Uganda, but also working with climate justice action groups on the continent. So when I heard about water scarcity, I asked myself, what is water without land? For those who don't have land, what is water? You know? So I intend to situate the question of water scarcity within the struggle for environmental justice and the struggle for end of extraction and exploitation of the world's most marginalized people. So it's very important that we see water scarcity as rooted in various struggles. And I was reflecting on my time where I grew up as a child, what water meant to me. I grew up in a rural household in southwestern Uganda near the DRC Rwanda border. We were very privileged that I had never seen something called water scarcity my whole life. You know, we did not know that because the climate there, the water resource is one of the most abundant you can find. Situated right on the tropics and the tropical rainforest near the Congo. We are very blessed. So I did not ever see a moment where as a village, as a people, we struggled to think about water. And for me, at my childhood, around water was really community, was coming together as a community to fetch water from the well as a young girl. And my experiences were rooted within community from young girls, young boys, everybody, so many women coming to the well to wash their clothes, and men taking part in the, you know, cleaning of the well. You know, it brought men together to clean the well. So water for us was a communal resource. It didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, however you might define that. For us, as long as water was there, everybody had access to it. It didn't matter what small piece of land you had, but everybody who had access to the water, whose property had water, it was open to everybody. It's still very much open to everybody, and that's how, in my community, people still live. We go to fetch water. Even though there's been, of course, changes that in some parts, people have access to piped water from the mountains. But this is not but this is not common for most of the rural areas in Uganda. But what has changed in my work and traveling around the continent and around the country on reflecting of water as a resource? Increasingly, in many African countries, we are seeing the pressure of private investors in our land. And it's very heartbreaking that many people are being dispossessed of their land. I went to one of the areas in the country where women, children were living in camps. We have thousands of people living in camps because they've been thrown off their land. So for those people, what is water without the land? That's what I kept remembering. Like these people, for them, water, once their land is taken and the private investor comes from outside and cordons off the land, it's no longer a community resource. Water has moved from a community resource and it's under threat because of private capital. And when we think about investments, we have to continuously ask ourselves, what kind of investments can we make that are not going to put profit above the people? Because that's what is happening. From big plantations of palm oil, sugarcane, industrial agriculture is targeting the very livelihoods of the people. Yes, climate change is our reality, but this reality, just as to a greater extent, climate change is man-made, these realities are man-made. We are upholding, as a world, very unequal power systems where people who are rich get rich and co-opt and take over poor people's land, and the poor continue to be dispossessed and stay on the margins. For me, there's nothing about talking about water if we do not talk about these injustices. I am here to reflect on the fact that right now in the world, in Uganda, anywhere, whether Latin America, Africa, to be an environmental activist is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, because capital is on your head. The minute you speak out, everybody's bought in the chain of community in the leadership. Once the investor comes into your country, comes into your community, it's the end. It almost feels that powerless. It's very important that we reflect on the struggles of people who keep us every day grounded and not give in to the fact that it can feel hopeless, that they put their lives on the line to continue speaking, to speak against sugarcane plantations, to speak against palm oil plantations. This is the reality of very many, because without their land and without their water, they are no longer a community, and they are going to be dependent on these large plantations for labor, and their livelihoods are washed away. So that, for me, it's one of the things that we have to keep thinking about when we think about water. Private land acquisitions in African countries, they are not just done, oftentimes when you hear about land and extraction, you hear a particular country. And it's very, very common to say China in this case. But I can assure you, 60% of EU land deals, private companies from the EU, 60% of their land deals are based in Africa. That's not something you hear about. So it's very important to reflect from wherever you are, the fact that it's not just a particular place, a particular country. We see inequality and who has power to get into a community and extract their resources and take the money out. So it's very important to situate this conversation on water, on how this threat to water scarcity exists in different communities. Definitely, this requires us to think about the global extractionist system that we all live in, that we have to confront daily. It's very important to remember that land dispossession cannot exist if the system does not exist. If the system of an individual, of a community, does not exist, then many people would still be on their land. They would still have access to their water points and water resources. So it's very important to know, like today, the right to decide how natural resources like water and land will be used, when and by whom, by what scale, and for what purpose, for many communities, it's out of their hands. They don't have this right. The right exists to somebody else with power and capital. So that's why the voices of feminists, particularly ecofeminists in the continent and in Latin America, in Asia, they are loud, they are present, whether it's at the climate change negotiations or every day. The fight has been on to remind us that we are operating in a very, very unsustainable system globally. The development, the path we are on as a globe is not sustainable. And it's very important to know who pays the price of that unsustainability. We can talk about ourselves trying to push for solutions, but we need to understand that for generations, some people have already been sacrificed by this development path. So alongside that, we have to ask ourselves not only solutions for the future, but how do we ensure social accountability, and how do we correct the past if it's ever even possible? Because it's not, but how do you do justice? So we have to think about justice. And for me, the solutions are already there. These communities are not simply victims. They've been fighting, they've been trying to put different voices in terms of solutions on what could work, because at the same time, people say, oh, we're trying to get you out of poverty. That's why we take your land. But what kind of model is that? That you take away someone's land and you tell them you're getting them out of poverty. You're making them dependent on you from day to day, from their home, from what they eat. That's why the solutions have been there. People have been talking. Activists have been talking. We have growing movements. Very incredible, vibrant, young children speaking out against climate change, on climate change and for climate action. There's a huge movement happening right now on the continent in Africa and highlighting many of these issues. So any sustainable venture, any sustainable path has to listen to those who are most affected. And like my sister said, like, where can you get water if the land is disappearing under the sea? Whether the land is disappearing under the sea because of rising sea levels, or somebody's pushing you off that land, really what matters is that we understand that the current power imbalance on who suffers and who survives, who is asked to adapt and who has to slowly mitigate, as we have seen from the latest climate change talks that didn't go anywhere in Glasgow. We have to ask ourselves, within this lifetime, what can we do to actually make sure that those, at least those who are at the very margins, because we are not affected the same. We are not affected the same because the world is unequal, because the world has been shaped by different powers. And even in these communities, when I talk about women and children, in these camps, sexual abuse goes high up. Vulnerability goes high up once you're dispossessed of your land. So it's very important to always remember who is at the margins and who is being pushed further when what we call development happens. I'm here to just really echo the voices of everyday people fighting, from their village to the national assemblies, to young children holding placards every day, every Friday, and say, we want climate action. From everybody, from those who are responsible for the most emissions that are destroying our planet. We have to listen. It's time to listen. And not enough people are listening, from my experience. So I'm here to say that the solutions are there, but they have to be rooted in social accountability and knowing that many people have paid way far a higher price than for us to sit and do nothing. Thank you so much.